On December 28, 2010, 66-year-old Jack Wheeler, a veteran and highly respected Washington, D.C. consultant, abruptly left Manhattan, telling his wife he had urgent business in D.C. But instead of heading to D.C., Jack ended up in Wilmington, Delaware. For days, he was seen wandering the streets, disheveled and confused. Then, on the morning of December 31st, Jack's body was found in a landfill. He had been the victim of a brutal murder, his body discarded in a dumpster and transported to the landfill by a trash truck. Jack's murder shocked everyone who knew him, but despite extensive investigations, the circumstances surrounding his death remained shrouded in mystery. It's been over 13 years since Jack Wheeler was murdered, and investigators are still searching for the people or person responsible. Hey everyone, welcome back to Detective Perspective. My name is Derrick Levasseur. I'm a licensed private investigator and former police detective. Each week I'll be covering an unsolved case in story format. I'll then give you my perspective on the investigation and provide contact information for the individuals or organizations connected to the case so that if you have any tips, you can contact them directly and maybe you can help solve a case. So if you're someone who's interested in true crime, specifically unsolved cases, and you would like to hear my opinion on those investigations, please consider subscribing whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. Okay, so diving into Jack Wheeler's case, usually I'll have an opening. I'll just say this. This case could be featured as a movie. Maybe that's already in the works. Who knows? There's a lot of information about this case out there. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of twists, there's a lot of turns, and a lot of unanswered questions. So as we go through this case, I'm going to try to cover as much as I can. I just want to say up front that we may not include every single detail about this case. I'm trying to make sure I get all the facts out there. But if you feel that there's something important that needs to be added, as always, if you're watching on YouTube, you can weigh down in the comments below and everyone will see what you have posted. And if you're listening on audio, you can always leave a review and post your comments there as well. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I want to get right into this one. We have a lot of ground to cover. So without further ado, let's dive into this week's case. Born on December 14th, 1944, John Parsons Wheeler III, who went by Jack, was among the most accomplished individuals the United States has ever known. After graduating near the top of his class at West Point and later from Harvard Business School, Jack served at the U.S. Army's headquarters during the Vietnam War, where he played a pivotal role in the computerization of Army operations. Following the war, Jack attended Yale Law School, where he earned his Juris Doctor. He went on to work in many prestigious roles, including serving under 3 U.S. presidents and becoming a leading authority on biological and chemical weapons. And when I talk about Jack's resume, I'm really watering it down here. I will tell you that talking to Haley, the research on this guy, we had almost 5 pages of notable accomplishments. I could make an entire episode just on Jack's accomplishments. That's how incredible this guy's resume is. But for the sake of this episode, what you need to know is that if Jack took on a task, he got the job done. In the late 2000s, Jack retired and began working as a consultant for the MITRE Corporation, a nonprofit defense company that develops technologies for the Defense Department located in Washington, D.C. And although he was working in D.C., Jack and his wife, Catherine, lived in the historic district of Newcastle, Delaware, just outside of Wilmington. Around the same time Jack retired, a married couple, the Marinis, initiated construction of a new home across the street from where the Wheeler residence was. Jack was completely against the construction as he thought the new house would be taller than the other houses in the neighborhood and would mess up their view of the Delaware River and Battery Park. Jack was determined to stop the construction, and he took various legal actions against the Marinis, including filing lawsuits and petitions with the city. Despite his efforts, in 2009, Newcastle's Historic Commission granted the Marinis permission to build the house. Construction began, but Jack's legal battle with the Marinis extended well into 2010 and was still going on when Jack was murdered. Catherine later told media publication Slate that Jack was deeply invested in the fight over the Marini house. She said, quote, "He was a very intense person. Everything he did, he was intense about." And this isn't hard to believe. Whenever you're someone who's that accomplished, there's a certain level of intensity and determination that you have to accomplish the things that he had. So you can't just turn that switch on and off, whether it's for work, whether it's for your education, or for your personal life. Whatever that demeanor, whatever that approach is that you have to those things, you're going to carry it in every aspect of your life. Over the Christmas holiday in 2010, Jack and Catherine spent their time at their second home in Manhattan, New York, with plans to leave around December 30th to attend a wedding in Boston. However, on December 28th, Jack suddenly told Catherine that he needed to spend a few days working in D.C. Jack didn't provide any details on why he needed to go to work. He simply told Catherine that it was important and that he was going to stay in downtown D.C. rather than their home in Delaware. Catherine later told the Slate that she was upset by his decision to leave before the wedding, so after he left, they argued all day via text and email. They spoke again the following morning, but that was the last time Catherine ever heard from Jack. Over the next few days, she called and texted him, but his phone always went straight to voicemail. Catherine thought that Jack might be ignoring her, so she decided to go to the wedding without him. Then, on January 2nd, she received a call from the police. 66-year-old Jack had been found dead just before 10 a.m. on December 31st. Now let's backtrack a little bit to December 31st, because on that morning, an employee was at the landfill in Wilmington watching the dump truck unload its trash when he noticed a body fall out of it. The employee immediately called the police, and when they arrived, they observed that the victim appeared to have been murdered and that the body had not been in the dumpster for, quote, a long period of time. In an effort to identify the body, officers searched for any form of identification, and they discovered Jack's ID. Now, in addition to the ID, they also found money, a West Point ring, and a vintage Rolex watch that was still on his person. Jack's body was then transported to the Delaware medical examiner's office for an autopsy. The medical examiner concluded that while Jack had suffered from a heart attack, he had also been beaten with either an object or a body part such as a fist. According to Unsolved Mysteries, Jack had sustained numerous injuries, including a punctured lung, broken ribs, and head trauma. He also had bruises on his face and his mouth. His cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma, with the manner of death being homicide. Now, while the autopsy was being conducted, the police and the trash company began working together to determine which dumpster Jack's body had been in before being picked up by the dump truck. And I thought they did a pretty good job here, because by tracing the truck's route, which began at 4:20 that morning, they concluded that his body was likely placed in a commercial dumpster at one of 10 locations on the east side of Newark, which was approximately 15 miles from Newcastle and 16 miles from Wilmington. The trash company was also able to determine that based on Jack's location inside the truck, he'd likely been in a dumpster that was picked up earlier on in the route. The police then DNA tested the commercial dumpsters in question, and they eventually found the one that Jack's body had been in. However, as far as I can tell, they have never released the exact location of where that dumpster was, only that DNA was inside. Now, because Jack's body was left in a dumpster in Newark, the Newark Police Department took over the investigation, but for some reason, they did not notify Jack's family of his passing until January 2nd. Now, why they waited so long to notify Jack's family, I could give some reasonings behind it, but without being inside that police department, I would only be speculating. There might have been some confusion or maybe doubt about the fact that it was in fact Jack, and they wanted to double check and make sure that they had the right person, because the last thing you would want to do is call a family and tell their loved one that they're deceased. Come to find out, you got the wrong person. So you take an extra day or two, you make sure you have the right person, then you notify the family. Or in the process of waiting to find out who this person is, the family may reach out to file a missing persons report. Then you know you got the right guy. But that's only one theory. There could be multiple reasons. And again, I wouldn't know the true reason unless I was one of the investigators working the case, and clearly I wasn't. Now, here's where we get our first twist in this story, because in regards to this notification, because Jack's identification listed his residence in Newcastle, The Newark police contacted the Newcastle police to report his murder. Coincidentally, the Newcastle detectives were already on their way to Jack's house due to a report from his neighbor, Robert, about a potential burglary. So the day before, Robert, who usually kept an eye on the Wheeler home when they were out of town, noticed that the second floor window of the house was open. He was concerned, so he decided to check inside, and when he did, he found that several rooms were in complete disarray. According to the News Journal, broken plates filled the kitchen sink, chairs were overturned, a large plant was tipped over, Comet cleaner was scattered across the floor, spices were all over the floor and the table, and Jack's U.S. Military Academy sword was found on the ground. So there was a lot of chaos inside the house, but nothing seemed to be missing. Robert tried to contact Jack and Catherine to let them know about the situation, but he could never get a hold of them. When he still hadn't heard from them by December 31st, he decided that it was time to call the police. So that's the first part of the story that you really don't expect. You have this murder, but while this murder is taking place, you also have the victim's second home being ransacked, and yet it doesn't appear that it was a robbery. It looks like someone just damaged the home. What does this all mean? Well, we're going to get into that, but before we do, let's take our first break. Did you know that your temperature at night can have one of the greatest impacts on your sleep quality? If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets. Inspired by NASA, Miracle Made uses silver-infused fabrics and makes temperature-regulating bedding so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. Not only are these sheets thermal regulating, they're also self-cleaning. That's right, self-cleaning. As I mentioned earlier, they're infused with silver, which helps prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, leaving them staying cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other sheets, so no more gross odors. So yes, they're temperature regulating, they're self-cleaning, but they're also extremely comfortable, but without the high price tag of other luxury brands, and they feel just as nice, if not nicer, than the sheets you'd find in some 5-star hotels. These sheets are designed for your skin, so stop sleeping on bacteria because I think all of us know by now, bacteria, in most cases, not a good thing, especially when it comes to your skin. It can clog your pores, it can cause breakouts and acne. I don't know about you, but I'm all set with all of that. So sleep clean with Miracle by going to trymiracle.com/detective to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use my promo code DETECTIVE at checkout, you'll also get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle Made is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're not 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. So upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made by going to trymiracle.com/detective and use my code DETECTIVE to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40%. Again, that's trymiracle.com/detective, code DETECTIVE to treat yourself. Thank you to Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode. Okay, so we get this call, and the Newark detectives meet the Newcastle detectives at the Wheeler home, and they found the house in disarray, as I said, just like Robert had described. However, despite the chaotic state of the house, nothing of value appeared to be missing. There were expensive items like a TV, a stereo, and all of Catherine's art collection. It was still there, untouched. So it didn't appear that a robbery had taken place, and there were no signs indicating that Jack had been murdered inside the house, so the police would continue searching for an actual location where Jack had been killed. Given Jack's career in Washington, D.C., the police quickly brought in the FBI, ATF, and DEA. These agencies, along with the Newark and Newcastle police departments, joined forces to investigate Jack's murder. They immediately worked on piecing together the events that led to Jack ending up in the landfill. Thankfully, the police were able to assemble a fairly detailed timeline starting back on December 28th, when he abruptly left Catherine in Manhattan, telling her he was heading back to Washington, D.C. On the 28th, Jack left Manhattan and went to D.C., arriving at around 1:20 p.m. He had lunch near the White House, but then took an Amtrak train to Wilmington. The Washington Post reported that he arrived at around 7:30 p.m., and while his car was parked at the station, he never went to get it. Instead, he called a cab. Now, it's unclear where Jack went after this. However, at around 11:30 p.m., a fire broke out at the Marini house across the street from the Wheeler home. And if you remember, the Marini house is the house that Jack has had this problem with for years and had been fighting them through legal courses and was unsuccessful for the most part. And there's even more to this story because a neighbor reported seeing someone who matched Jack's description wearing a gray sweatshirt, dark pants, and a hat, throwing something lit on fire into the house right before the blaze began. The neighbor watched as the man calmly turned around, walked across the park, and disappeared. Now, after witnessing this, the neighbor called 911 and firefighters quickly arrived to put out the fire. While inspecting the scene, they found that several smoke bombs typically used for rodent control had been thrown inside. They also found a cell phone belonging to none other than Jack Wheeler. So this is obviously very incriminating for Jack, and there's been many theories out there regarding the cell phone and regarding his house being in disarray. One of the more prominent theories that I've heard was that allegedly he throws the smoke bombs, he loses his phone, and when he gets back to his house, he realizes that the phone is missing, and he thinks that he maybe misplaced it somewhere in the house, so in the process of looking for the phone, he tears everything apart. I have another theory, and it's not this epiphany that nobody's mentioned, but I think it's more likely that when he realizes he misplaced his phone, he knows exactly where he dropped it, but unfortunately by this point, he can't go back. So he has to do something that would justify or explain why his phone was found at the crime scene. I mean, this is a very intelligent man, so he would clearly know some ways to create reasonable doubt. I think he goes back to his place and destroys it to make it look like there was a robbery, even though he didn't take anything with him. That would explain why everything was still there. And when you really think about the specifics of the house, plates being broken in the sink, plants being tipped over, that's not typically things you find in a robbery. People aren't going around vandalizing the house just for the sake of doing it. They might vandalize something in the process of looking for a safe or valuables, but they're not usually throwing plates in the sink. It's just not what I've seen in my experience. So that's what I think is more likely. And as we go on in the story and you hear more of these details, and there's some crazy stuff to come, I think his behavior after the fact is even more indicative of the theory that I'm suggesting. So the next morning on December 29th, after all of this went down, Jack sent an email to Catherine and everything seemed normal, but tragically, this would be the last time she ever heard from him. Now, as far as this whole email is concerned, there's been some conversations online. People are wondering how he was able to send an email if he didn't have his phone. But we all know. I mean, listen, we're talking back 2010. Yeah, cell phones are prevalent, but computers are as well. He could have had his own laptop. He could have used a home computer. He could have used a computer at a library. There's a million explanations as to how he was able to send this email. But what I really think is important is not how he sent this email, but why. If you really think about the theory that I'm trying to put forward, that I'm proposing to you, he's trying to create this buffer between him and the fire. Well, here's just another layer. The day after he would have allegedly been committing this crime, he's sending emails to his wife saying everything's fine. He's this electronic evidence, maybe he's hoping that it will be used later to exonerate him. That's at least my thought behind it. Or he knows his phone's missing. He doesn't want his wife to get nervous. So it could be a double-edged sword where he's creating an alibi potentially, but also letting his wife know that he's okay and there's no need to worry. Now, after sending this email, Jack called a cab and was dropped off at Hotel DuPont in Wilmington. It's unclear why Jack went there. He didn't appear to go inside, and he never checked into the hotel. Now, just to point out again, there have been some people that questioned, well, how was he making phone calls if he lost his phone? I think there's a lot of simple explanations for this. He could have used a home phone. He could have used a phone at a gas station or a local restaurant or a convenience store. I'm confident in saying that more than likely, the answer is pretty straightforward, and police probably already have the answers to those questions, but they haven't released that information publicly, and that's why we don't know. But I don't think there's anything here to this. I don't think there was another person. More than likely, it's just a simple explanation, and if the police dropped that information to us, we'd all go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But as of right now, we don't know. Now at 9:30 a.m., Jack sent a series of emails to various people. He emailed his job at MITRE and reported that he'd been the victim of a home break-in during which his briefcase, key fob, badge, and cell phone had been stolen. He also reached out to his therapist saying he felt, quote, dazed and boxed in a corner after his argument with Catherine. So here he is again, separating himself from not only the fire, but also his cell phone, which he's probably assuming at this point was recovered by law enforcement. So he's building that alibi. He's also reaching out to his therapist, telling her or him that he's not feeling great about his current mental state. And that could be true. Maybe this is a combination of things where he really was stressed out over what was transpiring between him and Catherine. And there are some hints of that later in this episode. And we may get more insight into why he was feeling that way, but that's coming up very shortly. So back to the timeline, because by that evening, Jack was back in Newcastle, and at around 6 p.m., he went to a drugstore just a few blocks away from his home and asked the pharmacist, who he knew personally, for a ride to Wilmington. The pharmacist later recalled that Jack seemed upset, but he was still well put together, dressed in a black suit and a white shirt. The pharmacist couldn't leave work, so he offered to call a cab for Jack, but he said no. According to Unsolved Mysteries, as Jack was leaving the pharmacy, two people offered to give him a ride. He accepted, and they dropped him off at a downtown Wilmington parking garage located near the Newcastle County Courthouse. The police believed Jack thought his car was parked there, but in reality, it was still at the Amtrak station. At 6:42 p.m., surveillance footage captured Jack in the office corridor of the parking garage. The video showed Jack wandering around by himself. He was still wearing his black suit, but without a tie or overcoat. His collar was open, and his left jacket sleeve was covered in dirt. He was limping and had his left shoe on, but was carrying his damaged right shoe in his hand. Jack's demeanor was completely different from how he appeared at the pharmacy. Now he seemed lost and disoriented, and at times, he cautiously peeked around corners or looked out of doors before proceeding, as if he believed someone was following him. Now, I can't explain why Jack's behavior changed so much in 40 minutes, but there will be information in this episode shortly that could explain it. And what I will say is there's a possibility that this behavior is related to why Jack was eventually murdered, or may have been a result of the stress that was created by those circumstances that took place a day prior. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Just keep in mind what I just said, and we'll see if it makes sense for you later in this story. Now, while in the parking garage office, Jack did stop to speak with the office attendant. He explained that he wanted to warm up before paying for parking. However, the attendant quickly realized that Jack wasn't parked there at all. Jack then said that someone had robbed him and took his briefcase, which had the parking ticket inside. So this tells me two things. First off, although Jack's demeanor is off, mentally, he's still somewhat there because he's still going along with this narrative that his briefcase was stolen, and he's trying to accomplish something. What that is, I don't know. It also tells me that more than likely he wasn't in immediate danger, or he didn't feel he was in immediate danger, because if he did, I believe, like most of us would, if he felt like someone was really chasing him down, when he found this attendant, he would have said, "Thank God, I found someone. Can you call the police, or can I come inside?" He didn't do that. And so it doesn't appear that there was an immediate threat to Jack at that time, even though his current condition might suggest that he was. I don't think that was the case. And that theory is further solidified by the next part of the story, because the attendant offered to call the police or to drive Jack around the parking lot to find his car, but he said no to both. Another employee then offered to give Jack some money to help him get home, but he also declined, stating that he had plenty of cash. Jack then proceeded to walk down another hallway and out onto a parking level, and at around 7:05 p.m., he exited the garage and the police lost sight of him. So we do have the video that I'm describing here. I'm going to play it for you now. It's a little over a minute. I'm going to have it in here for the YouTube video. If you're listening on audio, I do apologize. I'm going to have our editor Shannon cut it down so you don't have a big gap there. But if you have the ability to do so, if you're watching or listening on audio, I would say come over, watch this part of the video, and then you can go back to the audio version if you'd rather do that. But I think this video gives a lot of depth and creates different layers to what I'm describing here. And I also want you to see it to come to your own conclusion. So here's that video now, and then we'll continue on with the case. Okay, so there's the video. Now you've seen it. Hopefully it adds another dimension to the story for you as much as it did for me. I think it adds a lot of context. But back to this timeline. According to Delaware Online, at around 8 a.m. the following morning, which was now December 30th, Jack was spotted entering a Subway sandwich shop in Wilmington, and despite the cold weather, he wasn't wearing a coat. Now, according to the employees inside, his eyes were described as, quote, super bloodshot, and he was still dressed in his slacks and shoes. However, his white dress shirt was filthy from the elbow down. Jack ordered a coffee and paid for it in cash before leaving, and I think that's a critical part to the story because if he had been robbed, the cash would be gone, and I think the cash indicates some sign of potential deception where he's choosing to use cash over a card because he doesn't want to leave any type of digital trail. Again, this is an extremely intelligent man, and if he was trying to avoid leaving a trail of where he had been, cash would be the best way to do that. So is he doing this because he no longer has access to his wallet and or credit cards, or is he doing this intentionally? Now, later that day at around 3:30 p.m., Jack went inside the Nemours Building and made a stop at the Small Business Administration office. He asked for a ride to Philadelphia, but it doesn't appear that anyone was willing to take him. Later that evening at around 8:30 p.m., surveillance footage captured Jack inside the Nemours Building again, but this time he was wearing a different suit and a dark zip-up hooded sweatshirt with the hood up over his head. This change of clothes puzzled police as they had no idea where this new outfit had came from, and it also puzzled Jack's family as they had never seen him wear a sweatshirt before. I don't really know what to make of it. To me, it sounds like this is a conscious effort to change his appearance. At this point, I still think it falls into the theory of him trying to cover his tracks. He's not doing a great job of it. He's making mistakes along the way. And at this point in the story, you're probably asking yourself, how could such an intelligent man, if he's trying to cover his tracks, make so many errors? I do think there may be a potential explanation for it. I'm not trying to drag it out. We will get there. The Associated Press reported that at this point, Jack went to a law firm inside the Nemours Building and asked for train fare and to speak with the managing partner. However, before he could meet with anyone, he left. Jack then exited the Nemours Building, walked outside, passed through the Hotel de Mont Valet parking area, and continued southeast. At approximately 8:42 p.m., Jack could be seen walking towards the east side of Wilmington, and according to the News Journal, this neighborhood is known as a hotspot for crime. This was the last time Jack was seen on surveillance. And to conclude our lengthy timeline, we returned to the landfill at around 10 a.m. the following morning. And while this timeline answered many questions, it also raised several more. For instance, how did Jack end up in Newark, 16 miles away from Wilmington, after leaving the Nemours Building? What happened to Jack between the time he left the Nemours Building at 8:42 p.m. and when the trash was picked up sometime after 4:20 a.m.? That's the real question. And we're going to keep going with the story, but let's take our last break. Okay, when it comes to podcasts, it's no secret. Ads are just a part of the game. And I always try to make sure that the products that I'm promoting to you are things I believe in, or things that I trust, or things that I've used. When it comes to this particular promotion, this is one that I'm definitely biased towards because it's a personal friend of mine, and that's Heather Ashley. I met Heather years ago, and I gravitated towards her authenticity and her passion for solving crimes. And that person that I've come to know and love is the same person that you'll hear from on her podcast, Big Mad True Crime. Heather is the sole host, and the theme of the show is getting big mad over true crime. All the cases are done by listener request, and there's no small talk. She gets right to the facts with her straightforward approach, and in many instances, she says what we're all thinking anyways. The show is also extremely well researched. I know that Heather does a lot of the shows herself, but in some cases she brings in other researchers, and one of them happens to be our very own Haley Gray, who does the episodes here on Detective Perspective. The best thing about Heather's show is her compassion for the victims and their families. She has a ton of respect for the victims. She always conveys that through her storytelling, and one of the reviews that I read on her show that I really liked was, quote, "She has a huge heart and zero time for BS," and I couldn't agree more. The episodes are the perfect length for a commute, and she usually does one case per episode, but sometimes she does do multi-parters like she did with the Chris Watts case. You can check out new episodes of Big Mad True Crime every Monday, I know I do, and you can listen on all podcast platforms, so make sure you go give her a listen. You won't regret it. Okay, we're back. We covered a lot so far, but now we're going to get into what happened after Jack's family was informed of his death. And I think the information that was revealed at that point is also very important and may answer some of the questions we've already posed in this episode. So on January 2nd, 2011, the Newark police contacted Jack's family to let them know he'd been found. Everyone who knew him was completely shocked by the news. I mean, let's face it, it's not every day that this highly educated and prominent D.C. figure is murdered and left in a dumpster. It was highly unusual and no one saw it coming. While Jack's loved ones mourned his loss, the investigation continued. However, by the end of the month, no arrests had been made, prompting the family to offer a $25,000 reward. And despite this sizable reward, it failed to generate the tips needed to solve the case. Then in May, Catherine sat down for interviews with USA Today and the News Journal and revealed that Jack had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She explained that he had been hospitalized in the past due to behavior she described as, quote, unusually focused and driven. However, she was quick to add that Jack hadn't experienced any concerning behavior in recent years. Catherine explained that although Jack occasionally ran out of medication while traveling, he was generally consistent in taking it, and on the rare occasions when he did miss a dose, she noted that he would become irritable, but nothing more serious than that. Catherine didn't believe that Jack had gone off his meds before his murder. However, she struggled to explain his behavior in the days leading up to his death, stating, quote, what happened to Jack in the last few days of his life didn't look like Jack. While speaking with the media, Catherine also addressed various theories people were spreading online about Jack's death. She said that some people believe that Jack had been robbed on the east side of town after leaving the Nemours Building. Then whoever robbed him left his body in the dumpster. She dismissed this idea, noting that he had his money, expensive watch, and his ring still on him when he was found. Now, I respectfully disagree with her. However, the police did not. Here's what they had to say. They said they also didn't believe this theory. Like Catherine said, robbers typically steal money and expensive jewelry. The police further noted that the robbers who rely on physical force usually leave their victims at the scene, not take them to a dumpster 16 miles away. Now, as I just said, I have a difference of opinion on this. I'm going to save it for my perspective. Another theory Catherine touched on was the theory that Jack was killed by a hitman because of the government jobs that he worked. Catherine again dismissed this as a likely scenario, stating, quote, he had a lot of enemies, but nobody that would kill him. Catherine mentioned that she had her own theory, but she would not publicly say which one it was because she didn't want to, quote, spur more theories. Finally, Catherine addressed the theory that maybe Jack wasn't murdered at all and he died from natural causes. Catherine shared that she had seen Jack's body and it definitely looked like he had been murdered. The police also dismissed this theory as well, citing the autopsy report which strongly indicated a case of homicide. In December of 2011, a year had passed since Jack's murder. The police informed the media that the case was, quote, almost dormant, and despite extensive efforts, they still had no suspects or motives and were uncertain where the murder had occurred. Following this update, media coverage significantly slowed down. The next major development didn't surface until 2017, when Catherine spoke to the Washington Post. She said there were still no answers about what happened to Jack, and because of this, she decided to increase the reward to $50,000. Now here's an interesting turn of events in this whole story, because Catherine said that after all these years, she believes that Jack was experiencing a, quote, bipolar episode before his death. She also thinks he was the person who had thrown the smoke bombs into the Marini home. She explained that just before his death, Jack specifically mentioned wanting to burn down the Marini home, and Catherine told him it was a crazy idea. She also shared with the Post, quote, I didn't think he would really do it, and after that conversation, I think he didn't want me to know that he was going to do it. Catherine further mentioned that she had other reasons to believe Jack was involved with the Marini house fire. She confirmed that Jack did in fact keep garden pest smoke bombs at the house, and after he died, she found receipts for black clothing and a ski mask. Now, before the interview with the Post was over, Catherine shared that she believes Jack was targeted for murder and that computer hacking was involved. She went on to explain that leading up to Jack's death, he wanted to investigate the people who had allowed the construction of the Marini home. Jack was so serious about this that he had asked a friend he had made in the hacker community to give him lessons. Catherine wonders if Jack somehow got caught hacking, which made someone mad and they decided to kill him. She said this would explain why he seemed so paranoid that someone was following him in the surveillance videos. Now, as far as I can tell, the police have not commented on this hacker theory, but that could be for multiple reasons. One reason, which is what I'm about to say here, and I mean this with all respect to Catherine, is that I don't think it's very viable. When you think about the circumstances that were going on that evening, it doesn't appear, based on surveillance footage, that law enforcement has ever indicated that there was proof that Jack was being followed, and I think they would have had something. There doesn't appear to be anything. It seems like he was alone the entire time. So whatever happened to him, whoever he encountered was later that evening, and I don't think it was planned. I think it was more by chance. So that's one reason they could not be commenting on it, because they don't want to dispute Catherine's theory. The other reason could be that there's some validity to it, and because they may have something that they're working on, they don't want to expose that. But in my professional opinion, I don't believe that's the case. Now, the last big update we have in Jack's case came in 2020 when Unsolved Mysteries aired an episode about his murder. Unfortunately, this did not lead to a resolution, and as of this recording, Jack's murder remains unsolved. The police have yet to name any suspects or identify a clear motive, leaving many questions unanswered. Okay, so here's the perspective, and instead of covering multiple theories, I'm going to give you my opinion on what I think transpired here, because I've been kind of teasing it throughout the episode, and I feel like as I lay out this overall theory, now that you have the facts of the case, I do feel like it checks a lot of the boxes and fills a lot of the holes, but you can be the judge. So for me, this is what I think happened. I think that Jack went into this situation with the intention on burning down the Marini home. He didn't want to leave a paper trail, and he didn't also want to tell Catherine, so he goes down to Delaware, trying to leave as little trace as possible, not taking his car, taking a cab, going over to the house, using the smoke bombs, and then his plan was to get out of there without being seen or heard by anyone. Unfortunately, when he gets back to his house, he realizes that he's lost his phone. And it doesn't take a guy of his intelligence to realize that's a game changer, and that will seal your fate when it comes to law enforcement. You already have a motive, now you have a means, and now they have a way to put you at the crime scene. So he knows, based on his background and his education, that he's in a lot of trouble. So now he has a whole different set of problems he has to deal with that he didn't plan on. He probably planned on going right back home after burning the house down, but now he has all these other circumstances that he has to handle before he can leave the area. So he ransacks his home. He tries to destroy it as much as he can. He's creating this alibi. And now, because he's stressed out by the situation and maybe hasn't taken his medication in a day or two, which caused him to think this fire was a good idea in the first place, he's starting to get more stressed out and more irritable, and this may trigger an attack based on his disorder. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm sure there's some medical experts in the comments section, so please weigh in and dispute anything I'm saying. I'm not claiming to be an expert in any way, shape, or form. But I do feel like that's backed up based on the behavior we see after the fact, the paranoia that comes into it, yet there doesn't appear to be any evidence to support that paranoia. I think law enforcement would have come out and said, yes, it does appear that he was being followed, or it does appear that he had been attacked. Nothing that he had claimed to the attendants or anyone else for that matter aligned with what we saw. He's in the hallway, nobody's around him. He appears to be injured, and yet he says that he's fine and that he doesn't need assistance. He says he was robbed, and yet he has his cash. So very contradictory there throughout the whole thing. And I feel like, to me, he was trying to create a narrative so that when law enforcement found his phone, he would be able to say, yeah, listen, I wasn't there. My house was robbed. I was actually attacked in Wilmington nowhere near the house fire. I was a victim. I should be calling you guys because I need help. And I think as he was going through this process, he was getting more and more stressed out, which was triggering his bipolar disorder to a higher degree. At that point, he's making bad decisions, and I feel like he's losing his way, just compiling a problem and making it even worse by compounding the issues. And at some point, I think a different set of circumstances take place. I feel like these issues are two separate things. I do not feel like the murder is connected to the fire. I do not believe that the murder is connected to the condition that we see him in on video. I think it's two different things, but unfortunately they piled on top of each other. What do I mean by that? I feel that he's going through the situation. He's trying to cover his tracks. He's trying to create an alibi. He may have covered himself in dirt. He may have injured himself while lashing out or, having a tantrum attack. We don't know. But as he's leaving the Nemours Building and he's walking down the road, already making multiple bad decisions, I do think he encounters someone who offers to give him a ride. Or they may have just encountered him seeing this white guy dressed up in a suit, walking by himself, or at this point he has the hoodie on actually, and they approach him. And I think they decide to rob him. Now, to address what law enforcement said earlier this episode, and also Catherine said as well, they make the argument that this couldn't have been a robbery gone wrong because all his valuable items were still in his possession. I want to address that. I don't disagree with them. However, just because that's usually what happens, it doesn't mean it's always what happens. And there is this understanding amongst criminals where they know what crimes they're committing and what the potential repercussions are from those crimes. They understand that there's a big difference between robbery and murder. And based on the autopsy, what I believe we could have here is a robbery that went wrong. They went into it with the intention on robbing Jack because he did. He had a watch on. He had this expensive ring on. They found cash on him, and he probably refused to give them anything. That just seemed like the type of guy that he was. So an assault ensues. He's badly beaten, and during the process of that assault, he dies of a heart attack. That probably wasn't the intent of his attacker or attackers. Once they realize that they've killed him, that's when they decide not to take anything because they don't want to be connected to a murder. They don't want to be found pawning off a Rolex or getting rid of a ring down the line that may connect them to something that could put them in prison for life. So at that point, they decide they not only are not going to take anything, but they need to get the body away from their stomping grounds where they may potentially be connected to this crime by local law enforcement. So at that point, for circumstances unknown to me or you, they decide to transport his body probably a short distance. 15, 16 miles isn't 2 cities away or 2 states away. It's not that far. They transport his body. They put him in the dumpster to separate themselves from where the attack actually occurred, and then he's eventually found. Occam's razor. Sometimes the simple explanation is the right one. And when you consider the facts that we do know, that theory does align. So just to recap, Jack goes into the situation with the intent on committing arson. The arson goes wrong when he accidentally leaves his phone behind, creating a whole different set of circumstances that he now has to deal with. Those set of circumstances creates a high level of stress, which triggers his bipolar disorder, causing him to make more inaccurate and more desperate decisions, leading to further trouble. He finds himself all over the place trying to patch up the ship that's got leaky holes everywhere, and he realizes that he's only making the situation worse by being caught on camera in multiple locations, which is why later he decides, oh, you know what? Maybe this next time I'll go in with a hood. If he was in his right state of mind, he would have known it's too late for that at this point. He's already been seen on camera multiple times in multiple locations. But again, he's not in the right state of mind. At that point, by the end of the night, he's desperate. He's walking down the road. He comes across someone who maybe right at that moment attacks him, or poses as an ally, poses as a friend, offers to give him a ride with the intent on robbing him all along. And that's where things go south. So I think all the incidences that happened over the previous days led to him being in an area of town that was known for crime, and he came across the wrong individuals. I do not think those individuals had known him prior, and I do not think those individuals were connected to anything he had done earlier. But that's just my opinion, and it doesn't mean that there's not something bigger going on here. What I said is just kind of the pragmatic approach. But if everything was that easy, we wouldn't have 50% of the homicides in this country going unsolved. There could be something more going on here. This guy was connected to a lot. Jack was involved in a lot of government issues, and he probably pissed a lot of people off along the way. You also could have a situation, and I don't know the Marinis, we didn't look into them, where they might have figured out pretty quickly that Jack was involved and they decided to track him down and retaliate. No indication of that, but I'm just throwing it out there. There's a lot of scenarios at play, but the more scenarios you talk about, the more things that would have to align that just don't appear to be supported by any evidence or information that we do have after all these years. But there's a reason this case hasn't been solved. No one has come forward. And as always, there could be someone who's watching or listening to this episode right now who has the final piece of this puzzle. So just to recap, Jack Wheeler was last seen on surveillance footage at 8:42 p.m. on December 30th, 2010, walking away from the Nemours Building in Wilmington, Delaware. He headed southeast toward the east side of the city, and at some point after that, Jack was murdered and his body was discarded in a commercial dumpster 16 miles away in Newark, Delaware. Anyone with information is asked to contact Delaware Crime Stoppers at 1-800-TIP-3333 or go to DelawareCrimeStoppers.com. As always, my final words go out to Catherine and her family. On the surface, this appears to be a bad decision that turned into a tragic circumstance, and it doesn't change what we're fighting for here. Catherine deserves to have those answers. Yes, Jack has been laid to rest, but we still don't have the person responsible for this, and they deserve to answer for their crimes. So we're going to keep pushing for you, Catherine. We're going to keep pushing for Jack, and hopefully at some point, this case is still relatively new, someone messes up. And I think that in this situation, if it was a street level crime where this individual or individuals are known to the community, it may not be them that comes forward and confesses, but someone who knows about it may be implicated in a crime in exchange for, a lesser sentence or a deal. They may come forward and say, hey, I know what happened to Jack Wheeler. And I think that's going to be the angle here where hopefully we can solve this case. But until then, we'll be fighting for you. We'll be fighting for your family. And if there's any update, I will let you guys know the outcome as soon as it becomes available. But until then, everyone stay safe out there, and I'll see you next week.